Hi, I'm Kerry-Lynne, Member of Parliament for South Surrey White Rock. I'm speaking to you today about the freedom of expression of Canadians. If the last 2 years have taught us anything, it is that Canadians need to participate in active and respectful dialogue about current events, and often these conversations take place online. Canadians should be able to ask certain questions and share opinions without the fear of online censorship by this government. And I worry that Bill C-11, that passed third reading on June 21st with the support of all parties except the Conservatives, leaves the door open for this exact scenario. The Broadcasting Act was established in 1991, before social media, before YouTube, and before streaming services like Netflix and Prime. So it makes perfect sense that this bill needed a facelift. However, in modernizing this act, we should have properly accounted for Canadians' freedom of expression. We cannot be censoring Canadians in their everyday use of the internet, especially when the last 2 years have shown us how heavily we rely on these platforms for information, interaction, and entertainment. Bill C-11 does the important job of modernizing the Broadcasting Act to ensure that revenue from streaming services like Crave, owned by Bell Media, gets reinvested into Canadian productions. This means more jobs in Canada, more Canadian-made content, and more opportunity for Canadian artists. All good things in theory. The problem is that Bill C-11, like Bill C-10 before it, remains vague in many of its definitions. This imprecision leaves room for everyday content to be censored by the government and leaves content creators scratching their heads. For example, there is no definition in the Act about what counts as Canadian content, yet one of the main reasons for modernizing the bill is to require streaming services to feature a certain amount of Canadian content and to reinvest into Canadian productions. Instead, the minister has chosen to leave it up to CRTC to define Canadian content after the bill has passed. This leaves far too much room for interruption or interpretation and could easily be solved by building in a definition to the bill. Furthermore, the bill refers to exemptions for users who generate or receive programming through social media services. Yet again, social media services is never defined in the bill. So what is a social media service? Facebook would be an obvious one, so would Twitter, but what about Snapchat? Which apps and profiles are Canadians going to be monitored on? Defining this in the bill would have ensured that CRTC has a clear framework and gives an extra safeguard that user-created content will not be regulated or censored. Instead of being precise and building this language into the Act, like Conservatives and many Canadians asked for, this government continued to use vague language that has left room for abuse of power. Multiple experts and industry leaders have expressed their concerns over both the old C-10 and the revamped C-11. For example, YouTube warned users beforehand that should C-11 pass, user content could be affected. They've noted that the text contradicts the minister's public assurances that content like home cooking videos will not be regulated. YouTube also hoped that if the government did want to regulate YouTube users' videos, there would have been appropriate consultation. Former CRTC Commissioner Timothy Denton shared his worries about this government's proposed internet regulation, stating, quote, "It is creepily totalitarian, something you might expect out of China or Russia," end quote. Is this the kind of policy this government wants to pursue? Apparently so. A policy that puts our country in the same category as Russia, who has invaded Ukraine with the hope of eradicating an entire culture, and China, that imprisons journalists and their own people for believing in a different religion than the government prefers. As University of Ottawa professor Michael Geist pointed out in 2021, quote, "The kind of speech that many Canadians engage in on these platforms is just basic, fundamental freedom of expression that does not require and should not be subject to any sort of regulation or regulatory oversight by a broadcasting regulator," end quote. Canadians use social media every day to discuss what's going on in the world. They are learning and debating and trying to form an opinion. This content shouldn't be monitored or regulated by the government. If users are afraid of being censored, this dialogue may not happen at all, but this discourse is vital to a functioning democracy. The minister repeatedly said that there are exceptions built into the bill and that user-created content would not be regulated, so Canadians have nothing to worry about. Yet we see in the text of the bill that these assurances simply do not stand up. Specifically, Section 4.2, Sub 2, overturns any exceptions laid out earlier in the Act by allowing CRTC the discretion to regulate audiovisual content based on 3 criteria. 1, whether the content generates revenue for someone, directly or indirectly. 2, whether any part of the content has been broadcast on a more traditional broadcasting platform. And 3, whether the content has been assigned a, quote, unique identifier, end quote, under any international standard system. This means that most audiovisual content could still be regulated by CRTC should CRTC choose to do so. For example, under these circumstances, if a 16-year-old uploads a YouTube video of them playing Fortnite and it goes viral, it could now be regulated by the CRTC. If they choose to monetize this video, this can once again be regulated by CRTC. Just a child uploading a video for fun could be regulated and potentially censored. As well, many independent content creators upload their content to multiple platforms to reach more viewers. C-11 would allow CRTC to regulate users who do this. So in reality, this bill could actually punish smaller content producers who are gaining success. Not only does C-11 affect content creators, but it also affects viewers. To promote and increase visibility of officially recognized Canadian-made content, of which we still don't have a definition, other content that users might usually see and enjoy will need to be demoted. In other words, not only will CRTC be choosing what exactly qualifies as Canadian content, they will also get to choose what of that content gets promoted on people's news feeds. Of course, the minister will probably try and point out that the bill explicitly bars the CRTC from forcing platforms to use a certain algorithm. However, if the CRTC is demanding certain outcomes from those platforms, the only way to accomplish those results will be to manipulate the algorithm in a suitable way. Once again, we see this government giving all too much power to a single organization of its choice. This leaves Canadians to face the consequences, which in this case is the possibility of losing a fundamental charter right. My husband is in the film industry, and I have met with organizations like the Directors Guild of Canada, so I do understand the need to modernize this bill. But we can, and we needed to do so without compromising Canadians' fundamental rights and freedoms. We called for more clarity in the language of this bill. This government continues to say that they believe in Canadians' right to freedom of expression and that they have no intention to infringe upon that right. If the government is serious about protecting our charter rights, there is a very simple solution. They should have added the necessary definitions to the bill, built that language in so that accountability is also built in. We all support more Canadian content. We all want to see Canadian productions receiving the funding and the recognition they deserve. This bill needed to come into the 21st century. No one is arguing that, but we cannot infringe on basic charter rights to do so. We saw a bill pass that will give sweeping power to a single organization to be making very important decisions without any accountability to Parliament or to the public. I remain in your service, and I thank you.